Hello, learners. Welcome to our session today. I am your instructor, CPA Ringo Frederick. In our class today, my good students, I want us to look at a question from our pilot paper, and that is question number 23, part A. Recall, we had already looked at part C of the question, so today's class, I want us to focus on part A and part B of the question. So looking at this question of ours, these are what you're told. That in this case, we're having you are a financial management consultant in an investment firm. A potential client requests you to analyze an investment with the following features. The cost of investment, which is 10 million shillings. The investment pays out a sum of X at the end of the first year. This payout grows at the rate of 10% per year for 11 years. So, in this case, yes, you're having the investment pays out a sum of X at the end of the first year, right? This payout grows at the rate of 10% per year. For how many years? For 11 years. So, year one, will not be looking at it as growth, but rather from year 2 henceforth is going to grow for a period of what? 11 years, right? So literally you're looking at it as if we are talking about 12 years. Year 1 with no growth, but 11 years it will be growing all through, right? Required here, you're told that if your discount rate is 15%, calculate the minimum value of X that should attract the investor to make the investment. Anytime you're handling the concept of NPV with our knowledge of financial management, if I told you to look at the minimum value that we should have for us to attract that investment, of course, we are looking at break-even point, right? Where my NPV is equal to 0. When our NPV is equal to 0, that simply describes that our present value of our cash inflows is equal to our total initial cost. So ideally here, we'll want to look at a minimum value of the first year. If your discount rate can get the minimum value of X, that should attract the investor to make the investment. Basically, we are looking at the concept of NPV. And NPV talk about what? The aspect of my NPV is equal to 0. Okay? So once we have that case, these are now what we should be having. We are talking of part 2. The respective NPVs of the investment if the discount rates were to range between 10% and 15%. So I'm looking at one variable that is changing. So ideally here, the concept of one variable data table should click at the back of our mind, right? Then part B, we are told that assume that you have 3 project scenario as outlined here. We are supposed to prepare the detailed outcomes of the project under each of the above scenarios. So let us jump and start and see how we are going to work this one out. First of all, we start with part 1. So basically, I'm going to open a new sheet 2. Identifying our variables, first of all, we are having cost of investment, which is 10 million. So talk of cost of investment. Ideally here is what? 10 million, right? Cost of investment. Basically, we are looking at 10 million. Our figures here in thousands. The discount rate. Discount rate, our good examiner had given us what? 15%. Growth rate. Growth rate here, we're given 10%, right? Then we are given that the 10% was growing for 11 years. Then what about our minimum value that we should be having in year 1? Minimum value in year 1, which ideally now is X that we don't have, right? So, how are we going to determine the value of X? By the fact that you are told here that if your discount rate is 15%, calculate the minimum value of X that should attract the investor to make the investment. Basically, at this point, we want to determine our value of X, which will attract the investor to make this investment, and we've agreed. At this point, anytime you're talking of minimum, basically we are looking at break even, right? So these are what you're going to assume, which will enable us to work it out backwards for us to arrive at the value of X, right? So if we are paying out the value of X at the end of the first year, that payout grows at the rate of 15% for 11 years. So we are required to determine the minimum value of X that should attract the investor to make what? The investment. So ideally, at that point, let us go with this assumption. Of course, so I'm having year 0. Then from year 0 here, we are talking of year 1, which is now X, because remember year 0 won't be having this a period that you're making, we're making that investment, right? So basically, of course, I'll be having that value. This will grow for 11 years. So ideally, that should take us up to 12 years, right? Because this is X. This is X. This is X times 1.1 all through, right? So at this point, these are what I want us to take. Our growth rate, which is 10%, ideally here, let us have it as a 1.1, okay? So year 0, I'm having an investment of 10 million, which is our outlay. Year 1, I'm having X, which in this case is what? X is 1. Year 2, I'll be having X, which is times the growth rate 1.1, right? So that all through for 11 years, basically, just a moment, I need to lock this one. So all through, because that is a constant factor, that's why we are locking, all through to year 12, I'll be having X, I'll be having 1.10x, I'll be having 1.21x, I'll be having 1.33x, I'll be having all these details, right? So minimum value that I should be having, that is where we say that our NPV at minimum value, basically this is a break-even point. NPV, at what value will our NPV be equal to 0? This will be very easy to work it out. These are what you'll be requested to do. Recall the function of NPV. Recall the function of NPV. I'll just do equal sign. NPV tab. My rate is 15%. Our value is all through. Yeah. I close that plus our initial investment. So my NPV at this point, using this bit here, we are getting an NPV of this much, right? So after we have determined our NPV, remember our target is to achieve our NPV of 0, whereby, recall the whole concept of NPV. Maybe if I can remind you here, NPV, we normally tend to say that NPV will always be equal to what? Our present value for cash flows minus our initial outlay, right? So this is our NPV. So I want a value minimum which will give us our NPV to be equal to what? To 0. Our NPV to be equal to 0. So that's where we're going to apply the concept of course, goal seek. Recall goal seek, we've already looked at goal seek. So basically at this point, I know you are very familiar with goal seek. So how are we going to go about it? In this case, of course, I'll come to my data ribbon, or data ribbon, what if analysis. Recall, goal seek. So At this point, I need to set my NPV, this cell that we've calculated, to be equal to 0. By changing which cell? By changing the cash flow of year 1. By changing the cash flow of year 1. So that if at all, if I were to kind of have it all through, because X at year 1, what should I earn at year 1? So that as at the end of the day, we should be having an NPV of equal to 0, the minimum investment, right? So by changing the cell of year 1, remember we had looked at this concept of goal seek, right? So I just do okay. Hula, the magic, right? See how it has calculated for us very easily. So basically at this point, my value, come back to our question here, where we were asked to, if our discount rate is 15%, to calculate the minimum value of X that should attract the investor to make the investment. So the minimum value of X should be the minimum here, which is what? 1209. These are what I should be having. These are what we should be having as our minimum value of what? Minimum value of X that should attract this investor to make this investment. Because as at the end of the day, our NPV at minimum value, our NPV should be equal to what? To 0. And the catch basically was there for you to always identify that when you're asked at minimum investment, or rather minimum value that you should earn at any given point when you are looking at financial management, always recall the break-even point, right? So basically, that's what we are required to do in this question of ours, which I believe it has flowed very, very easily using the concept of goal seek. Using the concept of goal seek. Now, after we are done with that bit, proceed to the second question where we were asked by your examiner the respective NPVs of the investment if the discount rate were to range between 10% and 15%. So basically, we are done with that bit. Now, looking at part 2 of the question, we will ask the respective NPVs of the investment if the discount rates were to range between 10 to 15. That's why we've said we'll be using what? The goal seek, right? So I need my investment. These are our assumption. I'll be having, of course, our start. I'll be having our start rate, which is 10%, because you're told that they should range between 10 to 15, right? So you should be having in between 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. So increment, we can take 1%. So that when we are preparing our data table, this is what we should be having, right? Recall the rules of data table. We should always leave the first top left cell to be blank. So basically you're looking at NPV, net present value, and we're looking at what? At the rate. And basically we're going to use our original input. So basically rate, we can have it in columnar format. I'm having, of course, the 10%, the start rate, increasing by 1%, basically our range. So basically I should be having that plus that. Then I need to lock the constant value. Then we should scroll to 15, right? So having this case, our NPV, original NPV, the value that we had used, which in this case we got an NPV of 0. So allow me to pick our original formula. In this case, basically I'll be having that equal sign. So these are what we should be having, which ideally I've picked it up from this cell. And this cell, recall, it had our original input, right? So my rate, original rate was 15%, the one that we had used here. So this is the rate that we had used, our original input. So that inserting our table, these are one variable data table because I'm having the one variable that is changing, right? So I'm going to highlight all this. First of all, let me have this so that you can be able to understand it clearly. I can have it in a different, that, in that case, I'll be having it as that. So just formatting it to be kind of neat. So I'll have to highlight our data. Then we come to data, what if analysis. This time around I'm going to use what data table, and which cell are we do we want to get the results. What is our argument? Argument basically is if our rates change, which ideally our rates it is in columnar format. So I'll come to column input. Then I select our original input, which was discount rate of 15%. Then I want you guys to see this magic, right? See this magic, see this magic, see this magic. Once I do okay, it will give us basically these, sorry for that. Let us do like we are taking this bit. So many times maybe you'll find that you're having this error, right? You'll be like, now what's happening here? You'll find that this has appeared simply because these are what we've done. We've selected all these from the rates, the title here. Ideally, what we'll have done in this case, we just undo it. Sorry, we come to this bit whereby we insert our NPV, our original input. Our original rate basically is the 15%. Now, this is what we are supposed to do. You select your data from where your set is, the data set, not including the title, our data set, right? So that when you come to OTIF analysis, I want my data table and I want to change my column, or rather we want to insert our column input cell, because this is our argument, the rates. So I just come to this bit, original input, which was 15%. Now this is where the magic will appear. If I do okay, see what will give us. It will definitely give us our NPV at different rates between 10 to 15%, and having our argument, which we assumed to be NPV, which was equal to 0, or rather when you are looking at break-even point, right? So basically, these are what you're supposed to do in part 2 of the question. The respective NPVs of the investment, if the discount rates were to range between 10 to 15%. So basically, we've used one variable data table, and these are solution. These are solution, these are solution. Once you are done with that bit, proceed to the next question, where you ask the respective, that one we're done with that. Assume that you have 3 project scenarios as outlined below. Scenario 1, 2, 3, our discount rate, initial cost, starting cash flows, and growth in initial cash. So we are asked to prepare a detailed outcomes of the project under each of the above scenarios. So remember, these scenarios basically are based on what you are given on top. So growth rate, basically we'll be looking at it in terms of the period that you are given here. The period that you are given, right? So these are what you're going to do, what Mwalimu is going to do. We are going to have these scenarios. So basically, I'll take scenario 1, 2, 3. So in our case here, I can align them. Like you're having basically scenario 1, 2, and 3. Yeah, so basically these are what you're having, scenario 1, 2, and 3. At this point, if we were to talk of our discount rate, basically I just take our discount rate here. So these are basically our discount rate. We're having our initial and all these concepts. Allow me just to kind of pull them here quickly. Yeah. Or can have them there. Then you're having, of course, what you're referring to as the growth rate. So basically these are scenarios that you're having. So In this case, this was our discount rate, initial cost, yeah. We're having our starting cash flows, and we're having our growth rate, so basically these are the details that you're having, right? So I want us to prepare our NPV, because that is what the examiner wants us to prepare our NPV at each scenario. So what you're going to do, of course, here I'm going to pick the whole of this data of ours, the one that we had. I'll paste it here to make our work much easier. Then, of course, all these details will be changing. I can as well decide to take our NPV here. Remember, just looking at a way that we can clear all this basically so easily, and actually to ease in our work. So we are having so let us work it out. Let us start working it out. The first component here, my initial outlay, basically will be the 10 million, which you have it there, right? So I'm going to scroll all this in all the scenarios. The other bit here, we want to take our initial value here, our initial, or rather starting cash flow, you're given 1.5. So basically I'll be having that. You'll find that it will change everything here, right? So my NPV, that will be simple. Our NPV, function of NPV tab rate is 15% discount rate, comma, my data value basically is all this, yeah, plus that initial outlay. So this will be our NPV at that point, right? So once we have that case, again, all this data, I'm going to have it at that point. Where our first bit here, of course, is going to be the 2 million, correct? Growth rate, in this case, that should give us, of course, C4. Our growth rate, basically now, I'll be having my growth rate to be basically 1.08, right? I'll be having 1. Recall that, let me have this. Remember this, basically, we had it to be the same because it was just like what you had on top there. So in this case, if I were to copy our formula, let me do this 1.1. This is 1.08. This is 1.07, the growth rate, right? Because they are increasing at the rates that you're given. So to make sure that our formula copy is correct, what we can do, I'll just pick that formula, then I lock it up. F4. It just gives us the same results anyway. So once I scroll up to that bit, it's going to give us the same results. Now, in this case, of course, I'll copy this here. You can copy it at that point. Or let me do this so to make our work easier. So now my rate here will change. So basically I'll just be taking now our rate to be that. Then we lock it up. So of course I'm going to drag it down like that. Because this is what you're having here to be starting cash flows. So these are what you're having, right? The same case you're going to do for the other bit. Our starting cash flows was 4 million. So if at all I was to copy that one on that bit, I'm going to change my rate here, which I'm going to pick that one. Then I lock it up. Then we scroll down. So this will be our NPVs at different scenarios, where we are talking of scenario 1, 2, and 3. This will be our NPVs. This will be basically our NPVs. And that is what the examiner wanted you to determine. In this question of ours. Recall, we had already looked at part C of the question, so I'll not look at it again, but basically that's what you're required to do. So better still, for those who are not in, you can always check out the video that we did for this part C. So to that point, guys, thank you so much for listening to this and watch it out through the end. That is how you're supposed to solve the whole of that question for you to earn the whole marks. To that point, guys, thank you so much. You can get the you can get this file just below this video. Thank you, and let us meet in our next session.